Star Wars 7x7 episode 2535. It's time for a Bad Batch briefing. Yes, indeed, we are talking about episode 7 from season 1. It's Battle Scars. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So, Battle Scars takes us to the planet Braca, which is a planet that we saw briefly in the teaser footage and trailer footage that we saw from the Bad Batch prior to its release, and we talked about the possibility of it being Braca, but there have to be a lot of junkyard planets out there, right? And yet it is Braca. This is also the planet that was featured initially in the beginning of the story for Jedi Fallen Order, where Cal Kestis was hiding out before he was subsequently discovered there. But that happens in the future. In this particular case, we are brought into the story in the classic in media res situation where the Bad Batch is being fired upon as they flee a planet because of some Rokai lizard that they stole from someone who was apparently stealing it from someone else, and they managed to escape and turn the lizard over to Sid, ask, who wanted it and why, and she says, I don't know, maybe a pet, maybe to make a stew, it's not my business, and I don't care, I'm just getting paid. But we find out that the Bad Batch in the previous episode did not actually take a copy of what was in that tactical droid's head with them. They just turned the only copy that they had over to Rafa and Trace Martez, which I thought was interesting, but it certainly sets up the situation that they find themselves in right now from a story perspective, which is a lesson in finance and economics, because they are still in great debt to Sid for docking fees and port charges and food and gear and all of this stuff. And the Bad Batch is genuinely surprised by this stuff because they've never had to think about this sort of thing. Meanwhile, a hooded figure has entered the bar. And this is our hooded figure that we saw via hologram at the end of the previous episode. And it turns out to be, oh, and by the way, this is a spoiler-filled episode. So in case you haven't checked out this episode of The Bad Batch yet and don't want it spoiled for you, well, here's your fair warning. All right. So it turns out to be Captain Rex. So Captain Rex is revealed. And the reveal at this point, and just, looking across the rest of the show, this does seem like so far it's kind of a one-off, but they do leave things with a sort of, hey, if you ever need me, you know where to find me. Hey, if you ever need us, you know where to find us, like that sort of thing. But Rex is the one who is connected to Trace and Rafa and has continued the fight against the Empire. His reflection, although it's brief in the episode, but they do, have these elements in these shows. And I think it's great. He's just reflecting on the fact that he's just, pretty much been at war his whole life, but, he was sworn to protect the Republic. And even though it's fallen, that doesn't mean that he stops fighting necessarily. He's still fighting for a republic, and if it was taken over by someone else, even by nefarious means, that, he's still part of this fight. But the main thrust of this episode is to finally deal with a situation that has been a particular problem, and one where we've been actually, we use this exact phrase, ticking time bombs, the Bad Batch has inside their heads with the inhibitor chips, and it's the exact phrase that Rex uses in the show when he realizes that they don't have their inhibitor chips out. And there's a moment where, from, behind and a little lower, you see the perspective of him kind of moving his cloak aside so he can get access to his blaster. And that moment I thought was just so well done. I mean, the music behind it and, the easy Rex and just, the tension ratcheted up there really well. And so they make arrangements with Rex to meet on Braca to take care of this inhibitor chip situation once and for all, because Rex, witnesses Wrecker having another one of his headaches, and that's what precipitates the whole showdown situation, and thus them getting their inhibitor chips out. So they go to Braca and they're having to negotiate their way through all the wreckage to find a working med bay inside a scrapped Jedi Star Cruiser. And you get the idea that Rex has set up shop a little bit here, maybe because he's familiar enough with it, but he just told him to meet there, but I don't necessarily get the idea that this is his base of operations per se, but it seems like it's a place that he's well enough familiar with, which is unfortunate because of the end of the episode, and we'll get to that. But they're able to find a med bay and get it working and start to set up Wrecker. But yeah, we get that moment where the chip that had started to kind of trigger in the previous episode fully triggers in this episode, and we get to see Wrecker go full Order 66. And there was a moment where one of the clones was talking and said something about Order 66, and I was like, don't say Order 66, like don't say that phrase in front of him. But it doesn't seem to matter. It seems that the order has already been given and that the order already exists in the inhibitor chip, and it's just the inhibitor chip not actually being able to transmit it out to their brains to flip them over. And so there's quite the action sequence when they are all trying to subdue Wrecker, and Omega gets to the point where, she's going to have to fire a blaster at Wrecker to defend herself, but they've already built up the connection between Wrecker and Omega, and they have a tradition of going to get something called Mantel Mix, which kind of looks like popcorn basically, as a post-mission snack reward situation. And so, we know that they are developing this bond, and it gets to the point where he is about to kill Omega before Rex finally is able to stun him at the last minute, and Omega is getting ready to pull the trigger before he knocks it away, and yeah, it looks bad. But they're able to get him on the med bay and in the tube and get his chip extracted, and ultimately he just has this tearful apology, and I'm so sorry, I tried to fight it. And it's really touching, and I gotta say, kudos to D. Bradley Baker, because honestly the characterizations that he has to do between Hunter and Wrecker and Tech and Echo, and then bringing Rex back into the fold, and not only that, but he's having to convey the full range of emotion for all of these characters with all of these different voices, and yet still having to have echoes, no pun intended, of what that base clone voice is. So my gosh, D. Bradley Baker is doing yeoman's work in this series. It is just incredible. And so the rest of the Bad Batch, it seems they don't bother showing us, and that's fine because I think we all get it. All the rest of them get their inhibitor chips taken out. And so now that particular issue has been addressed. And so the Bad Batch is clean, they're safe, but they also know that they have an opportunity, a situation for being able to remove those chips. So you would have to imagine that in their heads at some point they're going to go after Crosshair and bring him back into the fold. But coming back to Braca is going to be a problem, because as Hunter and Rex say their goodbyes and Rex takes off, we find that they are being surveilled by the Scrapper Guild. They were trying to avoid being spotted by them, but nope, some folks at the Scrapper Guild see them there and they're like, quick, contact the Empire. The question is whether they're going to be able to get off of Braca before the Empire shows up, or if we're going to have a big battle in the Scrapyard planet. And we won't know that until next week, but that's kind of a cliffhangery end to the episode, which tends to be a little bit unusual. I mean, they have little sort of stinger endings, like I would say last episode with the call to the hooded figure. Like that adds a little bit of a mystery stinger that didn't necessarily even need to be resolved in the next episode. That could have come multiple episodes down the road if they wanted to. But this one is definitely just a straight up cliffhanger, because they're still in the middle of surgeries at the time that the Scrapper Guild sees them. And so, yeah, we'll have to see where it goes from there. And that is your briefing for the Bad Batch Battle Scars, episode 7 from season 1. And that is going to do it for this episode of the show. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.